Just a sec. Hello, thank you for coming. My name's Chris Watson. I'm an account director at the Working Manager, and I'm joined today by my client and colleague, Matt Cox, who's the OD manager at Bromford Group. We're going to talk to you today about building a business fit for the future, using simple technology to engage line managers in the performance management process. I think getting straight into it, the challenge as we see it, both as HR, L&D and business leaders, is you're only going to deliver your business objectives if you've got an effectively implemented strategy. And from our perspective as L&D and HR professionals, we're only going to be able to get that strategy engaged with by the line managers, communicate it through to our people. So it's really about how do we use our line managers to give feedback on business performance and ensure their team's performance and development aligns to our overall business objectives. As our colleague Charles Jennings put it, that's how you're going to deliver change at the speed of business. I think putting a little bit of context around that, earlier in the year, Charles Jennings, with his 70-20-10 forum, talked around what are the top 5 trends to watch. And I think these are probably things we've been seeing for a number of years. But first of all, it was about L&D moving to more performance consulting as an approach. It was about greater emphasis from our boards and our C-suite on L&D practitioners supporting learning within that workflow, within the workplace, and therefore being able to deliver rapid impact and value, but having to work very much with L&D and colleague development teams across businesses to actually deliver that. It was about faster uptake of technology for social learning, and it was about really using expertise sharing and getting people to work with each other in terms of self-directing their learning, working with peers, working with colleagues. And one that we're going to focus on today, it was about an increasing requirement for L&D to enable line leaders to continually develop as well as manage their people. And really that's the basis of what we're talking about today. And of course, as always, underneath that, it's doing that faster with less resources and lower budgets. Just to put that into context as well, I think there's been a lot of information about how you relate your customer engagement to your employee engagement. I know Bromford as an organisation are very, very focused on what their customers are doing. And some of our colleagues at Primary Colours Consulting were talked about their employee engagement surveys and the differences between 2010 and 2013. And essentially what they're saying is nothing's changed. You know, the idea that line manager critical is still the same, and we don't really seem to be doing so much about it and what we can do. So I think in summary, it's really the context around this piece was how can we engage our line managers in working as the front line supporting learning and development to actually get our managers to engage their people in performance and development and actually have more meaningful conversations. So what we're going to do today is look at a simple bit of project work that we did as TWM with our colleagues at Bromford that shows how learning technologies can be used to support line managers in that role and also be a useful tool in the HR L&D armory to actually help them facilitate that change from being trainers to being performance consultants. So first of all, probably useful, Matt, if you could just give a background about Bromford and where you're at.
Yeah, here at Bromford, we're called a social business. Traditionally we're known as a housing association, but we do more than that. So at Bromford, we don't just build homes, we support some 12,000 people in their own homes, which don't belong to Bromford. We work with contracts such as social services, probation, trying to get people back on their feet so they can get into employment, so then they can start looking after their own homes. We have about 1,200 colleagues across the Midlands. Most of them are, say 70% of our colleagues are field-based, and because of the nature of the contracts we work on, they have about 1 hour admin a week. So one of the challenges for us is how do we engage with those colleagues who are out there meeting our customers, and how the managers who manage us remotely engage with them and make sure that we're delivering on our contracts, but again the support to deliver the requirements of our customers.
So I think when we first started working with Bromford, what was really clear is they've got a very strong culture driven by really strong leadership, which is about being open and transparent. So the idea of managers sitting down with a colleague and actually having a conversation was already embedded. Our challenge was to work with Matt to make the systems that supported that from a technology point of view really work.
One of the things that we found looking at our culture We don't have a mission value statement anymore. We decided to move away because it was getting too complex for our colleagues. And we just work on 4 principles, what we call our DNA, which is be brave, be good, be commercial, and be different. And that way removed all the confusion and made it very simple. So what we make sure is every piece of work we do now has that DNA underlined, whether it's through our performance management, through learning, through our commercial business, or any development that we're working on.
And that is very important in the process. So what we've actually created is a site called Be Bromford, which is really the online resource that combines both performance management and learning management in one place. And the idea being that it's not just about learning and it's not just about performance, it's about creating a space where managers and colleagues can actually use that in one place and use it to support each of those elements. Essentially, we adhere to the 70-20-10 principles when we created it, in that it combines a really strong learning community, which allows people to support each other, be self-directed learners, with all the resources that I need in terms of my personal learning for me and my role, so the pathway I need to follow to get up to being job ready, with the formal resources that are available for me, including course booking or the things that are out there that are sets that I need to go through, and then using that to influence the performance process that I go through, how I interact with my manager. So I think the key being that it's about combining all the things that I need in one place. If we go into that performance area, the bit that we're going to focus on today is that one-to-one functionality, which in my view, and hopefully Matt will reinforce this, is the piece that really drove the engagement. It was the tool that actually gave the managers and the colleagues that point where they could interact with each other. We have also created a space around learning, which is really easily accessible, which is actually more personalised in that the Getting Job Ready pathway is your Getting Job Ready pathway, specific to you and your role. Some of these things like OCN or Grow Your Own will only be there if you're on the talent program, which is Grow Your Own, or if you're doing the customer service qualification. So it's all about making that space mine, but making it really accessible within that performance content. When we first were pulling this together, we looked at that one-to-one functionality and thought, okay, if we need our managers to continue having those conversations in their one-to-ones, we want to shift them more to those being around performance. And as Matt mentioned, Bromford had a very strong DNA, what it is to be Bromford, to work at Bromford. So for us, we felt that the starting point was actually the DNA expectations. So if we want to bring meaning to the conversations, actually let's get everybody focused on what it means to be part of Bromford and use that as a theme that kind of links the strategic intent of the board all the way down to front line. So Matt, probably, if you want to,
as I say, our culture around the 4 Bs, our DNA, is really important. So when managers are having their performance management conversations, which we try and make sure they have at least once a month, it's all focused around these 4 key areas. We don't always say they have to be exact, but one of the things is, are they being commercial with their time? Are they being brave in the way they deal with our customers? And we try and element all sections during that conversation so it feeds through the culture. And then if we group all that together, then we get a bigger image of how we are being commercial or how we're being different across the board.
So simply what we did with it is we allowed people to assess themselves at a point in time. So at any point in time, I can go on a 5-point scale and say, this is where I am. And obviously, I'll probably be thinking about a scenario that I'm relating that to. We also allow the managers to do that. So therefore, we got this set of data that was emerging that really became the conversation starter. So if you perhaps look at these examples, look at Q1 for Be Commercial, I as an individual have rated myself as a 3. Matt might have rated me as a 2. The difference is what starts the conversation. So what evidence can I show that I'm a 3? What are the things that I've done? And Matt might say, well, look, in order for you to get my expectations to a 3, why not do this development or show me this piece of activity? So it really starts that conversation and gives the manager something to say, okay, now when I'm talking about it, it's not just the tactical stuff that we do on day to day, but actually we can relate it directly back to our DNA, i.e. how the board think we should be behaving.
I think one of the biggest things we found as an organisation with this tool was not necessarily the numbers, it was how it created conversation between the manager and the colleague, where the colleague was seeing themselves here and the manager seeing themselves there, or vice versa. And it was about, well, why are you doing that? What can I do to be better? which is could only improve our DNA. But it's also, because we're spread across the Midlands, it started helping with like consistency in how we approach our customers.
So if you can see maybe another example of a shift through time, if you look at Be Brave, so in Q1, the colleague, me, rated myself as a 4, my manager rated me as a 1. And that might be because we're in different places physically, it might be because we're in different places in terms of our expectations. But essentially it started that conversation to say, well, what could you do to get my expectation up to a 4, and what can I do to support you to maybe be more realistic in your view? So if you can see through time, the next quarter when we reviewed it, I'd taken myself down to a 2. I'd been a bit more realistic about what we're doing. Actually, my manager has said, well, I think you've done this development, you've shown me this through your one-to-ones every month. Actually, I think you're a 4. And ultimately, we both get up to 4 because we're actually normalising through the process.
I think the other thing as well is, as an L&D team, we can pull reports and see which areas of the business are performing in certain areas. Why is one doing really well at commercial and the other's not? And go and find out to get that intelligence, and then work with that team to find out why, or what are they doing well, and transfer that across the business.
So having got that there, and managers can use it or not use it, employees can use it or not use it as they see fit, it gives them sort of support to actually get into the one-to-one conversation. It's a really simple tool. Essentially, I'm able to start a conversation. It's logged against the month that I started in. As I start that, and it doesn't matter whether I'm the colleague starting it saying, actually, I want to have a conversation with my manager about this, but I don't necessarily feel comfortable just going and speaking to them, or actually I do feel really comfortable, but I just want to log things through the month to pick up in my one-to-one. We start it. Right next to it is access to all the other things that I might want to influence it. So my SMART targets, my DNA scores, my personal development plan. It's all available for me to influence that. First thing I'd say about this is, bearing in mind we're in June, performance period started in March, I haven't got any conversations, and that in itself is actually quite telling. Why isn't that the case? If we look at possibly a better example, here's a series of conversations that take place. Essentially, they're date stamped to the month, and that was a preference set by Matt and his team to say we only actually expect once a month to have that conversation, but some conversations are more often, and they may be about different topics. There's workflow within there. So grey means I've started a conversation, but I haven't shared it. So I might be collating information through the month, but I haven't shared it with my manager yet. Orange means I have shared it, but I'm waiting for somebody else to do something. And green means between the two of us, we've signed this off. So we're trying to support people get through that process a little bit, and also give them somewhere where they can capture that information.
I think one of the key things that we learned when building the tool was colleagues wanted to record evidence or information to talk to the manager on a daily basis, dealing with their customers or their own lives. So it was important that they could record as they went along and then submit when they were ready. And the same as a manager, when they went out and did spot checks, visits, or were working on different contracts, they could record as they went along, and it all came together in one piece.
And I think, so that's the reason why this is a conversation, so it's not, doesn't mean to be reams, but you can add documents to it as well. So if there's a bit of evidence, so maybe I've got a really good bit of customer feedback, or I've produced a report and I want to share it, or I've done an assessment and I want to share it, it brings it in there and it's easily accessible.
Also, the way people record has been quite interesting. Some colleagues like to write direct into the system. Some people like to upload documents as evidence. Some people will copy and paste. So we made the tool very flexible to suit the colleague how they want to record their information.
And actually, just coming on to that, so the simplicity of the tool, it's simply, these are the things I'd like to talk about, or if we've had the conversation, these are the things we spoke about. But because we're capturing through time, you've got a historical record, it's easily accessible. From a manager's perspective, we created a view for the manager, which meant they could see their whole team. So if you see here, this is almost Matt's team, 6 reports, one-to-one conversations. First thing I can see is I've got some work to do because 4 of those conversations need me to do something to them. But if I'm, say, preparing for a one-to-one with Joanne Johnson, I can see, okay, well, let's go into the DNA and see where Joanne is on this quarter on her DNA scores. How's she doing on her targets? Is there something I need to do? Or actually just what did we speak about last time? So maybe we're having a remote visit. Some of your meetings do take place in McDonald's, I'm sure. Yep. I need to quickly go in, see what we spoke about, and then that means I can start the conversation with my colleague a lot more informed, a lot more up to date with the things that are important that we need to speak about rather than it just being a chit chat. when I'm having that conversation, or after I've had that conversation, or even in the notes before that conversation, it's really simple. I respond to what's up there, I put my notes in, and that's the tool really, it's that straightforward. I write down what I want to talk about, and then I capture my notes afterwards. But because I'm tracking that through time, we then have a record that we can all refer back to.
Just to add on to that, the tool's been really useful for our directors who go out on day visits. They can actually drill down to that colleague through the levels and see what they've been up to on their performance DNA, what they've been learning. But also on the more negative side is HR can also see that the manager's performance managing that colleague to get them back up to the right standard. So we're capturing all that information in one area. So because performance is linked to learning, so are we providing that learning, have they been on it, so they can get the colleague back on track.
So that's great. So sitting behind that and sort of alluding to that, HR have access to everything, or so do learning and development, but also we're able, because everything's being done online and everything's being tagged to a user at a point in time, we're able to produce a big set of reports around that and actually then provide that information, so that element of performance consulting for the L&D team is based on data and information. Probably the really interesting report is the exception report, i.e. who's not doing this, and that probably highlights areas within the business where perhaps managers aren't engaged, and therefore colleague development need to intervene. Or, so an interesting report is who started a conversation. Is it being started by colleagues, or is it being started by managers? And again, that's intelligence about where Matt's team might need to get involved. That drills down all the way to manager, but also it drills all the way back up to being able to produce it at organisation level, and there see the areas that are perhaps performing differently in different places. I think the biggest impact for me is what that then does to your annual appraisal, which, Matt, do you want to explain about looking back, looking forward?
Yeah, basically we encourage colleagues to have a conversation once a month, and then at the end of the year we have our, what we call looking back, looking forward appraisal. And that's where colleagues are performance rated on their performance over the year. So we wanted to make sure that we got all that piece together and it linked. Is that okay?
So I think the interesting thing for me was when you look at the tool, it looks very similar. So instantly managers, colleagues aren't going into that annual appraisal. It's a 20-page document. We've got to fill in it once or in a different system. It's just similar to what we're doing every month. It's one log, and we'll show you that next. Again, you can attach evidence to it or any additional documentation, and it's stamped in a point of time.
And I think what we're finding, having gone through the first year of this, the one-to-one conversations are forming the majority of the looking back. So it's made the actual time of actually running that performance annual review a lot quicker, because they've been having regular conversations, it's documented. So we focus more on the looking forward as a business, not what we're looking back. So that's where the benefit is of having it linked to the one-to-one conversations.
So I think what you can see from this is it's not an extensive form. It's a couple of boxes, looking back, looking forward, manager looking back, manager looking forward, and then ultimately a rating. So it really is about, we've got this body of evidence elsewhere within the system, we've got all of our one-to-ones, we've got our shift in DNA, we've got our progression on our learning pathways, we've got the courses that we've been on. This really is a snapshot in time that just says, okay, let's look at that rating, and therefore it's done quicker, it's more likely to be done because people are more comfortable with it. And I think, for me, that's the first big impact. It's made this process far more robust.
And also, it doesn't have to be done behind a desk. It's quite flexible to access it. So managers don't necessarily have to arrange 4 hours in an office to get the report done. The colleague does their bit up front, then the manager can do that, or they can do it after they've had the conversation. We don't set any parameters. All we ask is that they record something and put the rating in.
So I think the second area of impact, rather than the simplicity of the appraisal process, but therefore is how people are engaging with the system. So if you look at this, which is sort of the first year of that system, from a soft launch in March to April, we're now averaging 65 to 70% usage month on month of that system. And when you look at that in total, 93% of Bromford employees have actually used the system, and we know the other 80 are actually frontline colleagues that don't have access to technology. So effectively, it's pretty much everybody is using it, which you put into the context of there's no mandatory training on there, there's no compliance, it's just people using it because they're finding it useful. And therefore, for me, I think that's, it's a fantastic accolade in terms of how we've designed, implemented, and actually enhanced what was already there.
I think when we actually built the one-to-one program, we got the framework and colleagues were happy with that. What their concern was the technology wasn't good enough. So that was one of the key things. We went out and talked to the colleagues first. Well, what do you want it to do? What do you like? And then combination of all those ideas put into practice, working with the TWM to make it as simple and as easy for the colleagues to use with not so many clicks.
So I think if you look at what are the possibilities from here, we always, when we're working with clients, think about it as a journey, and so far we've been on a 2-year journey which continues. Once you've got that level of engagement, everything else becomes relevant. So using this for all the different things that you might want to do, and I think what's really interesting is therefore the learning in that space with the performance suddenly becomes relevant to colleagues, suddenly becomes relevant to employees because they're there anyway. So they're starting to use that other tool and just bring that through. For me, really interesting, when we first launched this page, it didn't have my targets or my to-do list. Those are actually pieces of functionality that colleagues have actually asked the L&D colleague development team for. So it was about saying, well, not everything's a smart target, so could you create us a to-do list area so we can just capture the things that we need to talk to our managers about, set actions and actually track them through time.
And some of the reason we come to that is because we was getting good reports on smart targets and actually reading them and seeing what they were, and feeling that some actually managers weren't setting clear smart targets. It was more, I want you to do this, and clear actions. So that's why we built the tool. With the role standards, again, smart targets for frontline, sometimes it's very difficult to set targets for repairs, guys just constantly repairing plumbing. And what we're looking at is just service standards. This is what we expect of our frontline, and because their contracts are so tight, the line manager can go out, observe, he's got the role standards on the tablet or on the phone, and just can rate straight away. So at least we're getting some performance on service intelligence that we can work with. But also from an L&D point of view, it will determine where the weak areas are, or the positives, so then we can go and tailor our service delivery and also our budget.
And role standards sit within my targets, so that's where that is. So I think you've got that idea of continual assessment and continual tools to give managers assessments and actually create an assessment there, which is, we can flexibly put a set of questions together, a 5-point scale to rate it, and then produce reports out of that very quickly. In fact, Matt's team could do that. So I think just looking at those possibilities, so once you've got that high engagement, which we've clearly got here, then I think the tool becomes strategically important. So it really creates possibilities for integrating the learning and performance and using the line manager to actually support that. And again, that enhances that role of manager as a coach or me as a self-directed learner. And I think it is fair to say with some of our clients, actually, managers aren't so great, and therefore we've put a bit more emphasis on me as a self-directed learner. In this case, we've got a strong management population. Because people are using it, it becomes another communication channel, so actually then you can drive people to things that are happening now in the business. And because people are logging things online, we're getting a lot more information that we can also respond to through that communication channel. So actually colleague development are getting a massive data that they can find areas of strength or weakness within the organisation and focus their limited resources in the places that will make a difference. I think obviously once you're online, you get into that whole social, informal communities, and we could probably do another presentation around the learning communities on Bradford. There's a huge amount that then opens up in terms of peer-to-peer support, collaboration, and more self-directed piece, and that whole informal personal learning. And I think it then also means that because I'm online, actually making personalised spaces with my learning, my pathway for my role is actually feasible because we know people are going to be there. So I think just to give a bit of value back at the end, so the shared learnings for simple technology deployed quickly can have big impact. In this case, it is quite a comprehensive system, but it was built around that one-to-one functionality. And for me, I think it's fair to say that was the thing that got everybody there and drove them to use it. And once we got them there, we could then start doing these other things about it. So I think the key thing being, understand what works for your organisation. In this case, it was one-to-one, and use that to drive engagement in the system, because then you'll really justify your investment across the piece. It's fair to say, when we designed it, we thought about people, process and technology. The culture was great, so the people bit was already there. The process was in place. What was needed was better technology to engage people in it. And once we got the technology right, everything else was enhanced. Obviously, it's not just about putting it out there and saying, hello, Mr. Line Manager, now have performance conversations. Looking back to that DNA, it was about saying, how can we support you to have better conversations? What can we do to help you make meaning and give you some alignment to organisational objectives? And we use the DNA in this case, but again, you might have another way of doing that. We focused on managers, but we still considered all the other stakeholders. What do L&D need out of it? What does the business need in terms of reporting? I as an individual, what do I need to do to interact that? Because I'm not just a manager, I'm also a colleague that needs to do some learning. And therefore it's about making it really simple in design, thinking about the user, and making it really easy to use. Interestingly, Romford are very strong on their language, but if you get the language right, and you'll notice that one-to-one says nothing about performance, managers are having performance conversations without actually realising it. They're just using the mechanisms there in the tool. And obviously, once you've got that, that means that people are using the system, they're logging information that allows you to be informed and focus on areas of greatest need, and therefore align the learning to the performance process and take that user on a journey as well as the organisation. I think if you're looking at that and saying, okay, well, maybe we're not there, or that's a bit more comprehensive than we want to go for. For us, it's about finding that one thing. We've looked at that and said, well, actually, what are the core things that you start off with in that initial portal? And it might not be that you have performance, you might just start with learning, but essentially that's what our portal Lite is about. It's about saying, what's your starting point? What are the wraparound tools that you need around it, and how do we create that so that actually you can start that journey? And it leads on to everything that Matt's got.
Yeah, I can agree with that. When we started this program, it was about finding a new performance system that could do our framework, but it became quite evident that we needed to attach the learning, because one-to-one conversations, then there's requirements. What do I need to make sure I'm delivering the service? So that's why the learning linked, but then we realised that because we're quite dispersed, it was like, how do we share the knowledge? So that's when we bring on the learning community, because L&D, we're not a big team like most organisations. We need our colleagues to share their knowledge and information, because we work on vast contracts and we need wider knowledge. So now the system's evolving, but it all started off with that one-to-one conversation for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the whole point of that is, what's the thing, what's the simple application that gets you the most engagement, that starts you on the journey, and what do you need to wrap around it? So I think I can't leave the last word to Matt. I'll have to leave it to Matt's boss, Helena. Helena essentially said, it's amazing what you can achieve when you've got your whole organisation behind you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.